The second ever edition of Beat the Closing Number, presented by thelines.com, episode number 2 with myself and Mo Nuwwarah. You can follow The Lines on Twitter at TheLinesUS. You can follow Mo and myself as our Twitter handles are up on the screen. And we'll introduce our guest, fantastic guest here, just a moment. But before we get started, remember to give the video a thumbs up, subscribe, and ring that bell to get notifications whenever The Lines releases a new sports betting video on any market, including Major League Baseball, which is the focus of the Beat the Closing Number podcast. And thelines.com is giving away another $25 Amazon gift card in our daily MLB Pick'em contest. For more details, head over to play.thelines.com. And as always, join the Lines Discord betting channel to get notifications whenever we place MLB bets, whether it's day-by-day bets, like Mo does a fantastic job of, or futures, like Mo also does, and I participate in as well. But without further ado, time to introduce Chris Bennett. You can follow him on Twitter at BetChris. He's the Director of Risk Management at Circa Sports with a primary focus on baseball. What's going on today, Chris?
Hi, guys. How's it going? Good to be here.
Yeah, we're excited to have you on. Last time you were on with the Lines podcast, it was with Nicole and I, and we were talking NFL, and as soon as I heard the excitement in your voice when we touched on World Series futures a bit, I knew I had to have you back on, because obviously baseball is your specialty, like we were touching on off podcast. So I'm sure this is a very exciting time of the year for you, or stressful, depending on how you want to look at it.
This is a very enjoyable time of year for me. I do a lot of work during spring training. We book those games, and I try to pretty much book all of them. I have a process for doing that. It's a lot of work. It's every single day for about 5 weeks. But once you get to the regular season, like we're in now, it's a little bit more enjoyable, a little less stressful, because there's just more interest from the public now that the games really count. And I like this time of year because I don't have to deal with all of like the NFL season going on. Try to figure out like, okay, how good is every team? Like, who are these young players that are going to emerge? Just being out here in Vegas, and the weather's getting nicer, and I can come home in the afternoon, put some baseball on TV. It might be a nice day out, have the balcony door open, and just really enjoy like what I get to do for a living and my favorite sport, baseball.
And I mentioned your title a little bit ago, Director of Risk Management. So for bettors that are unaware of what that means, and you were going into the process behind what Circa does futures-wise in general, but specifically how you operate the futures market for MLB specifically at Circa Sports. So if you want to delve into what your role pertains to, and also how you handle the Major League Baseball futures market and game-by-game markets for that matter.
So my role at Circa Sports is not by definition sport specific. I choose to be a specialist and to be our primary manager of markets when it comes to Major League Baseball and the NFL. MLB is my favorite sport. Like, that's the one that I want the most, and love to get as much help as I can from other members of the team in either of those sports and whatever markets we can and want to offer. But like, I'm going to spend time on baseball, like regardless of it being like a requirement for my job. I'm looking for other members of the team to be specialists in other sports that I don't have as much interest in, and I just don't have the time for. Like, when have got a sportsbook operation, you can't do it with just one or two people. You need a team, and you need specialists. And like, this is the week of the Masters right now, biggest golf tournament of the whole year. I'm not really doing anything for the Masters, but I still like golf. I love that, we have these events, and this week in particular, that gets so much interest from people. And we got guys in our team that are really good with golf, way better than I am, or probably ever could be if I dedicated all of my time to it. So I'm trying to make sure that we've got all of our sports covered as well as we possibly can, putting people in places to succeed, giving them a schedule that works so that, they can do a great job, that we can serve our customers to the best of our ability, and have other members of the team, cover all the other bases. So really just overseeing every aspect of risk management, putting people in the right places. And then you do want people to be able to specialize in the sports that they're most enthusiastic about. So, I've got to do a few different things, wear a couple different hats at all times. So, while I'm, looking at every single baseball game every day, and I've got an opinion on every side and total, I'm also doing all these, generalist things that come along with being the director of risk.
Yeah, and within that, you mentioned obviously the Masters, and Jeff Davis does a fantastic job for you guys. And in general, when I text with him, and I know he used to do more media stuff, tends to stay away from that as of now, and rightfully so. He's got a lot on his plate. And you think about the other bookmakers that you guys have, obviously Matt Metcalf, college basketball and college football. So maybe, again, people unfamiliar with the Circa Sports process of behind the counter, because obviously you guys differentiate yourself very well from most of the legal sports books across the U.S. when it comes to not only futures, but game-by-game odds. So maybe if you want to touch on that a little bit as well, like obviously you handle putting people in the right place to succeed for individual sports, but just the way you go about liability and the way you go about taking bigger bets, because obviously there's a lot of cause for concern in the sports betting industry, especially gambling Twitter, quote unquote, with limits across various legal sports books. So if you don't mind touching on that too.
Yeah, the way we try to differentiate ourselves, I would say, are with like some of the highest limits in the industry, especially for like the American sports that are, really popular here. Like we do most of our business in the state of Nevada. We want to have, really fair pricing on all of the markets that we offer. If we're not, the best in the market, usually pretty darn close to it. A way that you can see that directly is to look at, our prices on money lines on games in the major sports. Just look at the MLB and NHL money lines and compare it to what other sports books are offering, where it's just a two-sided market, and it should be pretty obvious. Oh, Circa's got, if not the best, close to the best pricing in these areas. Where it's a little more difficult to see directly are in the multi-way markets, like golfer to win a tournament. We're probably going to have the best overall pricing on the whole list of golfers, even if we might not have the best odds on that one specific golfer you're looking for in a given tournament. And then we don't want to be cutting people back to like obscenely low limits, which is something that a lot of our competitors do. Like we want to give everyone what we consider a fair bet on a given market. And if we feel we can't do that because there's just no way for us to, make any revenue off of that, or to have it like have some knock-on effect where it helps some other market, then we just don't want to offer it. Like we don't want to put something up and say, oh, you can only have, $25 on this. That's not good enough as far as we're concerned. It's not fair. So fairness, quality pricing in every market, customer service. We've got the Circa Resort and Casino here in downtown Las Vegas, and it's a great destination for people who like that traditional sportsbook viewing experience. So we want to have people come down and just love that experience. And also the stadium swim, our pool at Circa, very popular, and putting sports on a big screen and seeing the odds right alongside it isn't the pool experience that you get anywhere else. And like I take a lot of personal pride in the markets that I'm the primary manager for, like our implied hold percentage on team to win the World Series. Like I want to say I'm offering very fair odds on that market, and I want people to bet it. And we're probably never going to win, or not anytime soon, on having the largest menu Because if we just, pumped out a million different markets in every single sport, like you couldn't offer a fair bet on all that stuff. Third division Bolivian soccer, the lowest quality tennis tournament happening in Bangladesh. Like, there's no way you can expect to have anything good come of that as the operator. At least when your customers are in 3 of the United States, as it is right now. So we're not going to win there, and we can't always have all of these markets up continuously. Like, it's really tough to leave up odds to win the Super Bowl on a Sunday when you have 8 games going on simultaneously. Like, the things that are happening on the field of play, it's just too impactful to the odds, and you can't keep up with it as a bookmaker. So we do have to take some things off the board. But when something's on our board open for betting, like, our promise is that we're going to take a fair bet on that market.
So speaking of the markets you do manage, diving into the MLB stuff, first thing we wanted to check in on was what are some of the liability you guys have taken for World Series futures over at Circa?
So fairly early on, before any of the big free agents had signed, we took some money on the Yankees at 12-1 to win the World Series. And so they've been significantly lower than that for a few months now. And they did end up re-signing Aaron Judge, and they signed Carlos Rodon. So, the person that bet that might have had, a good feeling that the Yankees were willing to spend in free agency. And so, that's a good number right now. Nothing too extreme, though, because not surprising that the Yankees would do that and that they would have a high win total again this year. We've also taken some money on the Astros, obviously, defending World Series champions. That's not a surprise. We've taken some money on the Mariners. That's a team that's had a lot of buzz, a lot of optimism surrounding them coming into the beginning of the season. Another team, the Padres. Obviously, they have just been going all out for the last couple of years now, trying to put together an all-star team, basically. And I think people are believing for this year that there's just so much talent there that they ought to be a contender. And then another thing that usually happens on a regular basis is, I look at the worst teams in MLB and I put out pretty long odds on them. Right now we've got the Nationals at 3,000-1 to win the World Series. We've got teams like the Rockies and the A's that are around 1,000-1 or 750-1. And it doesn't take a lot of money to get some liability when teams are in that odds range. So right now, our worst result, I think, would be the A's winning the World Series. But I'm not currently very concerned about the A's winning the World Series either. So that's kind of what the distribution looks right now. People betting on a handful of the favorites and, of course, the long shots because, I put such a big number out there on those teams that I kind of dare them to make me sweat when it comes to winning it.
Yeah, it sounds like it's interesting because it sounds like not a lot of the teams in the middle get the most love. I think I was looking near the top of the board a little bit, but not quite at the top when I fired the Jays, not World Series, but AL. Give us your real quick opinion on if I was onto something I was a little bit lower on the Yankees and the Astros. So it doesn't look good for the Jays so far, but obviously very early. The starting pitching hasn't been the greatest.
Rough start for the Blue Jays. Chris Bassett and Jose Barrios did not have good first starts. If I'm a Blue Jays backer, I might be concerned about Chris Bassett. I don't know how much you can expect out of Jose Barrios at this point. He just might not be good. And if he's not, it's going to be to the Blue Jays' benefit if they yank him from the rotation, because they were very optimistic and positive on the adjustments that Yusei Kikuchi had made from last year's kind of disaster. And then he did really well in the spring. And I think he had a pretty good start yesterday against the Royals. So he could end up being the number 3 or number 4 option for them. But you look at Manoah and Gossman leading the rotation. Those are guys that you'd want to go into the playoffs with as your 1-2. The lineup looks absolutely dynamite on paper. The bullpen, I think, can be good. And then they've got a couple of wild cards as well with Nate Pearson, who was a big prospect a few years ago before getting injured. And then they got another guy, and I'm not quite sure how to pronounce his last name, Ricky Tiedemann, something like that. My apologies to him. I don't know how to pronounce it.
His family listens to the podcast.
I'm sure they do. I feel terrible. He's a big prospect, and there's a lot of buzz around him as well. So, if they're in contention middle of the season, you got to think there's going to be a plan to utilize him later in the year and potentially in the playoffs. So, not a fast start for the Blue Jays, but I think they have a lot of potential, and they've been a team that I didn't want to float too high of a number because I do believe in them. And I want to win to some of the teams on the markets that I'm managing. And I told you about which ones we have liability to. The Astros, I think, have maybe become or are a little bit overrated. This thought that, it's the Astros, they're super smart with the analytics, and they'll just bring up another guy from AAA and they'll be fine. They lost Verlander, and there's no direct replacement for him from last year. I think that's kind of a big deal. They signed Jose Abreu, which could end up being very valuable for the offense, but the bottom of their lineup, I don't think it's anything special. And now with Altuve getting hurt, you look at Mauricio Dubon, Chaz McCormick. They got some Corey Jelks guy out there. Martin Maldonado, great defensive catcher, not a good hitter. They're not invincible by any stretch. So given where the market is pricing them right now, I don't think there's any value in the Astros.
And you priced Houston at the beginning of the season. I think when they were posted on Twitter, at least the odd screen for World Series futures was up on Twitter. Astros at plus 700, still the same price as of now. And Houston off to a 3-4 start, I believe. But the rest of the market, to your point, across legal sports books that are more nationwide, I guess, per se, or across more states, still 4-1, as low as 4-1 to win the World Series. So I agree with you, and I think Mo does too. And to Mo's credit, he bet Astros win total under at 95.5. So Mo is looking happy right now, even though his bets on this Wednesday card have not gone so well to his liking so far. Hopefully he's a couple more later tonight. Short slate, though, on Wednesday, and another afternoon slate coming up on Thursday when this podcast is released. But we'll get back to the futures market because I'm curious whether it's for yourself as a bettor or as someone that handles the MLB betting market for Circa Sports. When you think about all of the new rules that come into place for Major League Baseball, obviously the pitch clock being most notable or one of the more notable changes to baseball this season, what are some of the market adjustments, if any, you've had to make as the lead trader, bookmaker for Circa, or as a bettor that you've had to adjust to?
So we've had a few significant rule changes for this MLB season, and it's something that, I want to figure it out as soon as possible. What is going to be different about this baseball season compared to last season, to the last few seasons? I should point out that the thing that I'm most concerned about, and the reason I'm the most concerned about is because it's not communicated publicly, is what is MLB doing to the actual constitution of the baseball? Because they've messed with the ball the last few years without telling people. They deadened the ball last year, and it became obvious after a few weeks that this is not the same baseball. You got guys squaring it up, and it's just a flyout, when in the past it was a home run. And, games were going under at a crazy rate early last year as a result. Yes, it's the time of year when it's cold and it's not good hitting conditions, but it was not just that. It was what they did to the baseball. And that's what I'm also concerned about this year. Are they going to do things now that we have a pitch clock and the games are going to be much shorter than they have been? Well, how about we make them a little higher scoring? How about we not use as dead of a ball as we used last year. Or we put some more juice in it, or whatever term you want to use, so that it flies farther and, has a higher exit velocity or whatever to increase the likelihood of a base hit. And we've had some really high scoring games so far. In fact, just 2 days ago, we offer this market every day of the season called the Grand Salami, where you can bet on whether the home teams or away teams will have more runs, and also the total number of runs scored. And 2 days ago, we had 180 runs scored across MLB, which is an insane total. It gets me wondering, okay, was this just an anomaly of bad pitching and great hitting, or do we have a different baseball? And there's been a couple of games so far where veteran pitchers with this pitch clock basically said they got fatigued, like in the 5th or 6th inning. Carlos Carrasco for the Mets, Kenta Maeda for the Twins. So that would tell you that the pitch clock is good for the hitters, at least right now, until the pitchers maybe adjust and figure out, how to manage with it better. The sizes of the bases increasing, and the rules on number of disengagements from the mound in a given at bat, that's good for run scoring. If you're at first base and you're thinking about stealing second, the pitcher has a limited number of opportunities to throw back to the bag at first and to keep you there. And also, with the bags being bigger, it's technically closer than it was before, and it's easier for you to stay on the bag if you're sliding into it. We've seen all these cases since we've had instant replay where a guy he's safe, basically. He touches the base before he's tagged, but then he slides off of it, and no part of his body is on the bag for a fraction of a second, but the fielder is still holding his glove against some part of his body, and then they go to review and you're out. There should be less of that with a bigger base. So that combination of factors, I think right now, is helping scoring overall. And I think there's been a handful of games, a few days early on here, where the market hasn't quite realized that, and totals have been too low in quite a few games. But it's catching on quickly. Just from what I could see today, the market's going to have it figured out pretty quickly, with one caveat. If baseball is changing what the ball's made of and putting in different batches on a daily basis or from series to series, then you never really know for sure. It's tough.
Yeah, we've definitely heard that from some other people as well when it comes to adjusting for the new rules, and run scoring is basically just the baseball is going to have a bigger effect than any of that. So it's really tough. I guess, so just following up on what you were saying about the rules, would you say you came into the season making an adjustment right away, or did you set the totals somewhat higher than you would have if these exact same pitchers and players were playing in a previous season? Or did you just set it normal and wait to see how the market responded?
So I think the impact of all the rule changes, over the course of an entire season of games, is significant. But for any one individual game, I think it's so small, it's almost negligible. I can't see it looking at the market or in making a number. What am I going to do? Say if this was last year, the total is 8.5 over -120. But now with all these rule changes, I'm going to make it 9 under -120. It's too small of a margin for me to really, have a strong opinion or really to do anything differently. Going to hang a number, and if it's not quite right, we're going to get a bet, we're going to move the number, and we're going to figure it out real quickly. So I wouldn't say there's been any real measurable difference in what I've done as far as making a number and putting up a number and booking the games to this point.
And just comparing that a little bit, or tangentially, I was talking with Matt Metcalf a few weeks ago during the NCAA tournament. And what you said right there stood out because obviously this goes back to Circa Sports and just your process overall. You want to literally evaluate, even though it might cost you a bet here or there just in terms of liability, hypothetically, because you guys obviously have you guys take more or bigger bets than other books in a sense. But Metcalf was telling me going back to, I think it was a first round game with Memphis and FAU. And the line, I think, opened at around Memphis -3, got bet down to 2.5. And he was seeing no action on Memphis at all. And at that point, it was still earlier in the week. So it wasn't like later in the week where he necessarily would have moved it down just because of the liability in a sense. But he mentioned that he just moved it to 2 just to see what would happen in the market if they would get any Memphis money. And even after that point, no one came in on the Tigers. So I just found that interesting in terms of what you were discussing with how you evaluate totals as a guy that's handling this on a day-to-day basis and making adjustments and waiting to see what happens rather than doing it a month in advance, kind of to Mo's point. And it was a good question, I thought, too.
Yeah, like as a bookmaker, especially, when you're taking a fair bet and you're willing to take a bigger bet the closer you get to a game, like you want to use that freedom that you have to move your numbers around when it's appropriate. And I think a lot of people that have worked in this industry have like this mindset of, if it's a point spread, you take a bet, you move it a half point. If it's like, if you're moving the price because it's, a money line or whatever the market is where you're not moving the number, you're just moving the price, that, well, you got a 20-cent split, -110 on both sides. And you take a bet and you go -125 plus 105. So that, if they bet -110 on one side and plus 105 on the other side, like, that's a winning combination for you as the bookmaker. But in practice, you can't always do that, or that's not always like the best way to do it. And you have to kind of know how much uncertainty there is in a given market. And you got to move the numbers around, sometimes more than you really want to, just to figure out like, okay, where's the top or the bottom of this number? Like, I don't know for sure. Like, I need people to bet it to tell me where that is. And that's a skill that I think Matt has, right up there with anybody else I've ever worked with in terms of being willing to go to those places that might be uncomfortable, but it's the right thing to do because, again, our job is to manage risk here. It's not to just take bets on one side. And if nobody bets the other side, you just throw up your arms and say, well, I moved it right every time. Well, no, you probably didn't if you didn't ever get a bet on the other side. So that's, one of the fun, challenging, and constant aspects of this job.
Yeah, I find it so fascinating. I know it was baseball aside for the people that are tuned in for those kind of topics and comparing it to college basketball, but just in the sense that, I mean, this and Mo obviously hears it as well, just being on Twitter. Or actually, I guess you're not as active on Twitter. Don't tweet as much as your coworker, Jeffrey Benson, who likes to throw
It's an
shots.
understatement.
Yeah, a little bit here and there every month. I'm just kidding. But just in terms of, I find it so intriguing as a discussion point because you have the dumb people out there, the dumb tweeters, and sorry for any of those people that listen to the podcast, but those who say Vegas knows, right? And this is a fishy Vegas line. Well, no, you guys who are creating this line, or bookmakers that are creating the line, traders that are helping create the line, are learning as well, learning on a day-to-day basis in a sense, right? Than just, exactly what you're doing, like to Mo's point, to Mo's question about the market and how you handle it in a season like this where there have been a lot of changes. So fun discussion there, but want to get back to the futures market for Major League Baseball. And we were hitting on this off air before we started the podcast that you're from Minnesota, grew up a Twins fan, and Mo has got me hooked back on the Twins. I bet Minnesota to win the division last year. We lost after the Twins had a good first half, crumbled down the stretch for the most part because of the Buxton injury, and hopefully, fingers crossed, he stays healthy. But after editing his article on why Minnesota should at least theoretically, because of the price, it was a good bet to win the AL Central, so I jumped on board. And I also bet Joe Ryan as a long shot to win AL Cy Young at 100-1. So I am fully invested in the Minnesota Twins for better or worse this year. But looking at how you have the Twins priced in the market, just in terms of the World Series, for instance, 30-1, which I believe is somewhere in the ballpark of 13th or 14th shortest odds overall, or in that range. White Sox behind them, Guardians behind them as well. I think the White Sox are priced at circa at around 44-1. So long story short here, what's your perception of a team like Minnesota that's kind of in the back end-ish of the middle tier of the World Series futures market? And are you high on a team that you used to be a fan of? Because obviously you work in a book, your fandom kind of dies off a little bit.
Yeah, I try to follow every team in Major League Baseball pretty equally. But, growing up, cheering for the team, watching a lot of games, I have a little bit different perspective when it comes to the Twins than any other team in the league. If they're on TV and I have a choice of the Twins broadcast or the opponent's broadcast, I'm probably going to choose the Twins broadcast every single time. There's one of their beat writers, Aaron Gleeman, who people who follow baseball probably know who that is. I think he's a great writer. I think he's really sharp. And if you want to know the Twins like really well, like read some of his articles in The Athletic, listen to his podcast. He knows the Twins inside and out. So that would be the best resource when it comes to them.
Dan Hayes also covers the Twins too for The Athletic. He used to cover the White Sox in Chicago. So just in relation, familiar with him as well.
Sorry, who was that?
Dan Hayes, or maybe not.
Maybe
he's not a notable Twins writer for you.
No, I have my list of Twins beat writers, and he's on that list. I just didn't hear you say the name.
Fair enough.
Yeah, no, I include him. He's a good resource for Twins information. But yeah, going back to my opinion on the Twins, I've followed the team and their betting markets over the years, and going into this year, especially after they were able to have Carlos Correa fall back into their lap, there's been a lot of buzz, a lot of optimism surrounding the Twins. And that's not just coming from Twins fans. That's just coming from people who, bet these futures markets, like regular season wins and the division. And maybe not as much World Series and pennant, but I wouldn't blame anyone for staying away from those, because Twins right now have the longest playoff losing streak in any sport ever. Which is really hard to do in baseball, because baseball is usually pretty competitive, but they have lost 18 in a row in the playoffs, which is amazing. And Minnesota historically has kind of been the home for losers when it comes to men's professional sports. Now, the Twins did win World Series going back to 1991 and 1987, but outside of that, there's been plenty of good teams, but they just don't win championships. This year's Twins team, they're not as good as the Yankees or the Blue Jays or the Astros or probably even the Rays or the Mariners. But the way that the MLB playoffs are structured, if they get in, they've got a shot. Because it's just such a small sample of games in the playoffs to advance. And the best team's not always going to win. And if they've got their top 4, top 5 starting pitchers all healthy, they actually look like a pretty good, playoff team as well, because that's depth. Winning a best of 7, you'd be happy to have any of those guys starting the first 4 games, and any of those guys are capable of dominating any lineup. Joe Ryan, Sonny Gray, Kenta Maeda, who are the other two? Pablo Lopez, who pitched today, and Tyler Mahle. I think all of those guys have...
He got hurt at the back end of last season, too.
Yeah, they've dealt with their share of injuries for sure, last year in particular. But those guys all have a high ceiling. So if, they're able to have everything kind of come together with those guys pitching up to their potential, and Byron Buxton can somehow miraculously stay healthy. He might need to play DH every single game. Maybe don't let him play in the field ever. Carlos Correa, who obviously had things pop up on his physicals with the Giants and the Mets, he's most important position player along with Byron Buxton. I think they do have the potential to win a World Series with this team. And it's baseball. So, what happens middle of the summer, any team that's in playoff contention, they're probably going to make some kind of move to improve their team. So, you keep that in the back of your mind as well. So I'm not quite ready to put them on the same level as the Guardians. And part of that is just how the market has treated both teams, just with the season wins and how they bet the odds to win the AL Central. But we could be talking 2 months from now and say, oh, the Twins are the best team in the AL Central, and that wouldn't surprise me. So not so much as a fan, as an objective analyst, I think there's a high ceiling for this team this year.
So the Twins have also got off to a hot start, and that was one thing we wanted to check in on, was basically pretty hot before, I guess, dropping a couple here straight to Miami. But how quickly do you change your opinion of teams in MLB? Because, you might see some things that make you wonder in week one, but how quick does it become actionable where you do start to change either a futures price or even just game to game prices?
So I'm doing my best to just think about the odds that I'm offering for the World Series and pennants on a daily basis. So every game does matter to me. At the same time, I'm not trying to overreact. If a good team gets swept by a bad team, their second series of the year, I don't want to make some crazy move on their futures prices that are based on a 162 game season. So if anything, I probably have to exercise a little bit of restraint when it comes to making moves early on. And I've felt like over the years, May and June is when you figure it out. And the opportunities typically arise where people that are managing these markets might not have made the adjustments that they should have made. And those are the best times, I think, to bet a team to win their division or to win the World Series or their pennant, where you kind of feel okay, I've got the landscape of the league mostly figured out. And I think, this is where this team fits in. What should their odds be, given that assessment? And so, look at the beginning of this year. The Rays have a very easy schedule to start out with. And as of this, podcast recording, they're 6-0. I think the Rays are really good. I think they can win the World Series, but they played the Tigers and the Nationals so far. So that's not really telling us a ton. So you gotta not be analyzing the schedule so much on a daily basis, because there are so many games and there's so much variance and randomness that we can't predict that's going to happen over the course of the year with injuries and trades and all that. But yeah, for the beginning of April here, I'm very vigilant. Stuff, like I said, stuff's going to happen and you got to react to it. But it's more like a 40 game sample size, I think, when you can feel real confident.
And obviously the Nationals, to your point about betting a team in around June, early July, the Nats from 2019 are a perfect example of that. I think they started 19-31, somewhere in that ballpark, and then obviously go on to be, I think, as high as 40-1, 50-1 to win the World Series and then win it all that season. So obviously you could have gotten down a nice bet in season, at least in the early portion before the All-Star break. But last question from me, Chris, and maybe I'm going to hold off on a Twins future long-term, just another team that I'm kind of curious about. And the pitching isn't there, but you still have them pretty, I assume power rated pretty high, considering Cardinals are 18-1 at Circa to win the World Series. And obviously, even though they've gotten off to a bit of a slow start too, the antithesis of the Rays in a sense, the pitching isn't there, but a team that could theoretically add around the deadline at least one upper tier arm, assuming they're in contention to win the division, considering the NL Central, just like the AL Central, is a pretty bad division unless the Pirates are somehow for real. But again, it goes back to the notion that it's still early. So is it team like St. Louis on your radar as a potential buy low, maybe at least to win the NL Central over the next couple months? Or is there another team that maybe sticks out based on the schedule, like you brought up, opposite way of thinking with Tampa Bay?
So the Cardinals, I think, as currently constructed, are very much a regular season team, because you look at their starting pitching and who would you line up in a playoff series right now if you're the Cardinals? There's not three guys where you can say, yeah, I feel really good, about these guys like dominating in the playoffs. But I think they have a great lineup with a ton of potential. And it seems like this organization keeps churning out great hitting prospects. And they deserve a lot of credit for what they've done over the years. And we're seeing it now with Jordan Walker, who's probably the most heralded young new position player this spring. And they put him on the major league roster for opening day. And we'll see if he sticks. No guarantee that he's not going to struggle, at least at the beginning here. He's very young. But you got guys like Nolan Gorman and Lars Nootbaar. And, you got Arenado and Goldschmidt right in the middle of the lineup there. So tons of potential. And I think they're going to win plenty of regular season games just from that lineup putting up 5-6 runs on a regular basis. And I think the pitching will be adequate enough that they can win 90-plus games. And I still think they're the best team in the division. The first handful of games hasn't changed my opinion on that. And given an expectation of them being in contention for the playoffs middle of the summer, I would think they're going to try to acquire some pitching help. So that's a team that can probably afford to get off to a bit of a slow start, because I do think they have so much quality with their lineup and depth. Our odds on them to win the World Series are like 18-1 right now. Part of that is, them being favorite to win their division, just looking at the competition there and where that could shake out for seeding in the playoffs. And we've taken a little bit of money on them. We're either a very small winner or a very small loser to them right now. So I'm in no hurry to raise their odds to something like 25-1 or higher, given all of those factors. But yeah, I think they're a very interesting team. And just yesterday, they had Steven Matz, who was just pretty ordinary as a starting pitcher. It was minus 135 against the Braves. And I think the Braves are the best team in baseball. So that tells you what the market thinks about this Cardinals team. Now, the Braves won that game 4-1, but still, the closing prices are telling you, the market's telling you what they think, of given pitchers and given teams and how they match up. So we'll see. Maybe, we'll look back and say, well, that was a dumb number from the market. But right now, there's a lot of respect for this Cardinals team. And I did think yesterday's number was too high, but I understand why the market likes them.
That is Chris Bennett. You can follow him again on Twitter at BetChris, the director of risk management. And obviously, as you can hear, does a ton of work in the MLB betting department over at Circa Sports. Be sure to follow him on Twitter at BetChris. Follow the Lines on Twitter at the Lines US. Chris, this may be a dumb question to wrap things up. Anything you want to promote over at Circa Sports? I know if anybody tweets Jeff Benson that they're at Circa, he'll tell them to go to the bar and get a free drink. But anything on your end that you would like to promote, or anything summer-wise that may be coming up at Circa when people go out to Vegas to bet on Major League Baseball in the coming months?
One thing I'll say, and it ties into my presence or lack thereof on Twitter, I typically don't tweet a lot because I don't want to spend my time arguing with people on Twitter. That's what ends up happening. You tweet something, and what kind of engagement do you get? You got somebody, arguing with you or telling you that you're a moron. And I just don't want to spend my time and energy on that. But I'm using Twitter all the time. It's an extremely valuable tool for me as a bookmaker and a bettor to get important news when it comes to sports. And I'm using Twitter for that. So I'm in a way very active on Twitter. And if people have, certain markets they want to bet, or before we started recording here, we were talking about baseball awards markets, and we had gotten a request to offer Ryan Weathers, a pitcher for the San Diego Padres, for the NL Cy Young. I listed the longest list of names I think in the world of players to win the NL Cy Young back when I put this up weeks ago, but I didn't list every single possible player that might throw a pitch for a National League team this year. So there were guys like that I didn't think were worth listing on my own. But if someone wants to bet on them, I'll make a number for you. And I did that for Ryan Weathers, and we got a bet, and that's great. I love when that happens. So just because you look at a market like that, don't feel like that's the be all end all. You can reach out to me. You can reach out to Jeff Benson, our most prominent sportsbook employee when it comes to Twitter and being in the spotlight. And, we'll do everything we can to, go to put that up for the customer and to give them that option to bet.
And Mo's computer just died. So I think that is a perfect way for this podcast to end for the third and final, or fourth or final time, whatever number it is. Follow Chris on Twitter and tweet Chris as well at BetChris. It's been a fun, great second edition of Beat the Closing Number, presented by the Lines.com, talking MLB betting each and every Wednesday. Podcast up on Thursday on YouTube, and also subscribe on Apple, Spotify, wherever you find your favorite podcast. So long, everybody.